So today is Holy Thursday, which, together with Easter and Good Friday, constitutes one of probably the most important days of the liturgical calendar. And on this day, we commemorate the Last Supper, the most important element of which was when Jesus established the Eucharist. In the Eucharist, Jesus gave us a means by which we can renew, perpetuate, or participate in the events surrounding his death and resurrection in one of the most intimate and direct manners this side of heaven, and thereby receive its effects. And there's a few readings that I'd like to share with you just as a sort of brief spiritual and theological meditation for this day. When you look at morning prayer for Holy Thursday, it one of the antiphons is, "The Lord has fed us with the finest wheat. He has filled us with honey from the rock." When you look at one of the responsory prayers, it says, quote, "By your blood, O Lord, you brought us back to God, from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation." And during the intercessory prayers, it says, quote, "You went up to Jerusalem to suffer and to enter into your glory. Bring your church to the Passover feast of heaven," unquote. So God gives us his spiritual blessings. And his spiritual blessings, more specifically, were won for us on the cross through his death and resurrection. But yet the Eucharist is one of the most profound manners in which we participate in and receive the effects of what Jesus did. And it's for this reason that food-based symbolism is used as a reference for the reception of God's blessings through Jesus Christ. And it's for this reason that, the concept of a paschal banquet is used simultaneously to refer to the Eucharist, if you look at other liturgical and theological texts, but also to what we see in heaven. Because the Catholic Church has always made a parallel between what happens in heaven and what happens in the liturgical celebrations of the Church, particularly the Eucharist. Just more generally, there is a parallel between the worship that we do on earth and the worship that takes place in heaven. But the thing is, one of the most profound, one of the highest forms of prayer or worship that we can participate in is the Eucharist. And thus, if heavenly worship is the perfection or culmination of earthly worship, then that means there would be a lot of profound parallels between what happens on earth and what happens in heaven. Thus, the Eucharist is one of the most profound ways of deepening the primary effect of God's plan of salvation, which is to draw us closer to himself. And it's for this reason that a lot of theologians and spiritual writers have, really contemplated or meditated upon this notion of the Eucharist as a means of deepening our love for Christ. And it's for this reason that a lot of theologians and a lot of saints and a lot of spiritual writers have spoken of the Eucharist as one of the most profound symbols or testaments of divine love. And we see this, for example, in the writings of the 20th century Carmelite friar Gabriel of Mary Magdalene. He's probably one of the greatest mystical writers of the past maybe 100 years or so, and which is why, I quote from him a lot on this channel. And he writes in his meditation on Holy Thursday, quote, "Christ gave the Eucharist to perpetuate his real living presence until the end of time," unquote. And then he goes on to quote from the medieval mystic Saint Catherine of Siena, who says, quote, "O you who are mad about your creature, true God and true man, you have left yourself wholly to us as food, so that we will not fall through weariness during our pilgrimage in this life, but will be fortified by you, O celestial nourishment. Unquote. And Gabriel of Mary Magdalene talks about that there's a very specific reason why, at least in John's Gospel, he talks about the institution of the Eucharist and the washing of the feet of the apostles. Like he places a lot of emphasis on those two elements of the Last Supper. And the reason is because through the Eucharist, through the washing of the feet, rather, that was a sign or an archetype or a standard, an example, a model to be followed of brotherly love, of self giving, self sacrificial love that all Christians and all Catholics are supposed to follow. On the other hand, um, the Eucharist was supposed to be a reminder of what Christ did for us on the cross, and the Eucharist is also supposed to be a sign or a reminder of Christ's continual presence in the church. And in fact, because of the reality of the real presence, the Eucharist actually is Christ present to us under the appearance of bread and wine. And the Mass is a renewal or a perpetuation of what Christ did. It's both a sign or a symbol of it, as well as that same reality under a different form. And thus, the Eucharist, as a reminder and as a participation in what Christ did for us, is supposed to motivate us to imitate his love and communicate to us the spiritual gifts whereby we are actually empowered to do so. And thus, Gabriel of Mary Magdalene said, quote, Jesus revealed to us the perfection of fraternal charity on the same evening that he instituted the Holy Eucharist, as if to indicate that such perfection should be both the fruit of the sacrament of the Eucharist and our response to this great gift. Unquote. So ultimately, I think the main thing to remember this Holy Thursday is as we attend Holy Thursday Mass, or even just, think about what it signifies, or take part in the various devotions associated with it, remember that as we think about the Last Supper, we need to remember that the Last Supper and the Eucharist is inseparable from the larger events of our salvation, and that the Eucharist is supposed to be something that cuts across space and time, something meant to help every generation of Catholic and Christian grow more deeply into the Paschal mystery, the mystery of our salvation. And so if you don't see yourself better understanding or getting more excited about what Christ did for us and trying to imitate it or cooperate with it in your life, then you don't really understand the Eucharist. But that's okay, because Christ is always there on the altar, in every Catholic church, as a perpetual reminder of what he did for us, as a perpetual sign of his death and resurrection. So visit Christ in the Eucharist. Think about why the Catholic Church does this, right? It's to constantly draw us closer into that Paschal mystery so that we can better appreciate it. That's what that is, right? That is meant to draw us closer into this. And the more we appreciate this, the more we will appreciate that. And the more we appreciate that, the more we can bear the fruits of someone faithful to the cross of Christ.